Yeah. Well, and I will also tell you, Zach, when I think about the communication barrier, and I think if I spent, if I put in a application and I sent in my resume and said, well, I was the commandant's protocol officer, and
Most people don't know what that means.
right, so they're like, we don't have one of those, and and really when I break it down and say, oh, well, I used to travel with what was our CEO all over the world. We'd make sure culturally we were giving gifts that were appropriate. We were, the logistics was taken care of. Then when we were back home, we were hosting congressional members. We were hosting, corporate. We were, you name it. We hosted them at the house for breakfast, lunch, dinner. We had events of 3,500 people. That was for me to host, to me to manage. And then they'd be like, oh, we actually have a girl that does that. We have a guy that does that, and this other one. Actually, we have 3 people that do all that. You just did all that on your own, And until you start to break down the what did you do, the title is so confusing that they're like, we don't have that. And so I think that is really, helping other veterans to say, okay, let's not talk about the title, because you can't just make up, sometimes people like sanitize that to some civilian term. That's not, some things just aren't a civilian term, but you have to articulate the what did you do to help them
Hmm.
understand there are 3 people in this organization that do that for us. We just didn't call it that.
Yeah, they like. That's where I say they don't speak the same, right? Because the words and the descriptors are like the military has awesome naming convention.
The
Awesome.
other thing I usually will recommend is, like we wait too long. I had a sergeant call me the other day and she's like, man, what should I do? Should I get out? I have all these people at work telling me to reenlist. And I'm like, well, do you want to reenlist? And she's like, no, I want to get out. And I'm like, well, then why don't you get out? And she's like, because all these people are telling me I should stay in. And I recognized, I was like, you know what? The problem is the people she's talking to have never got out. So if it was the all the active duty people, that's all they know. And then there's a couple a handful of GS people there, but they probably were active duty 5 minutes before they became GS 12. And
Yeah.
so they never transitioned. They're just still there, and they're like living the good old days where they're like, I wish I was still in. You should stay in. And she's saying, I actually want to get out. But she only has this echo chamber to stay in, right? And so it's helping the people that are on the fence, like being active. And so I told her, I'm like, we should not be waiting. And so I recognized, there is a guilt when you're talking about getting out, that people will make you feel bad. But really, there's just so few people that serve their country. It's like we should be saying after 4 years, like, thank you for your service, right? Like, you did more than half of the world, 90% of the world, will ever do. So you are amazing. Not why are you quitting or why are you getting out? And when I left the Marine Corps after 20 years, I still felt, because I left on my own terms, it was like, well, I'm done. I want to go start a business. But I still, people would say, why are you getting out? And I'm like, well, because I'm done. I want to do something else. And so there's kind of this guilt around it. And I think that if we didn't feel so guilty about talking about transition, then we could lean in, 18 months prior, and we could join organizations that are civilian equivalents. If you're a contractor, you're going to contractor conferences, you're going to protocol conferences, event planners, hospitality, right? You're living this space with civilians. You're learning a new language so that you're like, oh, I'm hosting an event with 3,500 people. And the girl's like, holy cow. Well, the most I've ever done is 400. And you're like, really? Because they just make me do 400 every Friday at the Commandant's house. So that's a normal average week for me, And so to recognize where you stand, for you to understand, I do bring something to the table that I just was told to do it, so I did it. And hanging out with those people in those, conferences and professional organizations and really creating a relationship outside of DoD will then allow for you to build up that network so that when you get to that spot and you're like talking to your friend that is a civilian and she works hospitality over at the Waldorf, and you're like, I think I'm actually going to be retiring next year. And they're like, Misty, you know what? You should apply because we have this director job and blah, 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 blah. Because you've built a trust, and you've explained what you do, and you've had other, and so there's just been a
Yep.
relationship you've built. But instead, we make everybody feel guilty to talk about retirement, talk about transition. So you wait until the very last minute, and then you're like, I'm retiring. 2 days later, you're like out and you're telling the world you're retired, but it's too late. So then you have this hard
Yep.
time because you've not built that network of people that you could have leaned in early. But we're never going to do that. Like, I mean, gosh, that would be my dream. But to be able to have somebody say, "Oh, can I leave early because I was going to go to this networking event?" People would be like, "You're a dirtbag." Like, why you're thinking about, you're not focused on your own
Yep.
job here. You're thinking about next chapter, when that is not the way we should look at it.
I completely agree with you. It's one of those things that um, people don't understand, that when they're ready to be done, it's a digital switch. It's on or off, and when that switch turns off, it's the now what. And people aren't just waiting with open arms to accept
Mm-hmm.
you. To the okay, hi, I'm here, and that's a big rude awakening for a significant amount of people that don't, if they don't have a network and they haven't been prepared for it, then they hit the, what I'm going to say, the oh
Mm-hmm.
shit. And I think you just gave another master's class on how to think about it for people. And so I hope that this reaches a significant amount of people where they can hear that. And don't be afraid to start to lean into things and build networks now, because that's going to make that transition for people
Mm-hmm.
easier. And once that switch flips, it's, unless you already have a network established and you already have the thing, like, people don't just magically appear like Lucky Charms and say, "Hi, I'm here. I want you." It takes
Mm-hmm.
effort.
Exactly.
It takes work. And look, like, the average, one of my best friends works in the background screening industry. He runs one of the top companies in the world for this, and he he says on average it's like 3 months. Like, from the moment that they say, like, you start until you're placed, is 3 months on average. And depending on what level you're going for, the higher the level, the longer the average. So it like, people need to be prepared. Like, it
Yeah.
takes a while.
Yeah, and you can speed it up if you lean in instead of waiting until it's that place that you are desperate, or you accept something that's really under your absolute value. It's just that at this point you're like, I'll just take anything. But if you were to,
Yep.
join those organizations and talk and stand in those circles and explain what you're doing currently, then they're starting to understand, and you're helping them just as much as they're going to help you.